I'm Michael Killen. I'm in CMCM Marin TV in Marin County, which is a little northeast of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'm with Peter B. Collins, and he has many accomplishments in radio, a lot of experience. And I'm going to ask him a bit about his experience in radio. I'm also going to focus on the kind of service he is presently providing to a listening audience, maybe across the United States. Peter, how are you today?
Michael, pleasure to be here.
Peter, before I ask you about your experience, there are some issues that you are very concerned with, and you have an audio program. I would call it a podcast service.
You may.
Okay. Would you like to identify a few issues that you continue to report on?
Sure. I'm an independent progressive. I'm not a member of a political party. And I cover the issues that I think are most critical facing our country today.
Can I have three of them?
The creeping police state and surveillance of Americans in the United States, our endless wars abroad, and the fundamental denial of the climate change issues by key players who are keeping us in a pattern of damaging the planet.
Could we address climate change first?
Sure.
I think you said there are some people who maybe are influence our thinking that allows us to move forward addressing climate change, or maybe not addressing it. Help me.
Well, it's complicated, and let's take California and Governor Jerry Brown. He has become an international advocate to stay in the Paris Accords and to continue to reduce carbon emissions.
Is that good or bad?
Well, it's complicated.
Help me.
Because this week, Jerry Brown dropped in on a state Senate committee hearing, and he was in incredible Jerry Brown form. He wagged his fingers. He told these legislators that this is not about him because he'll be dead when the real crap hits the fan. And so he is incredible in motivating people. And when I've talked to him in the past, when he was out of office in the 1990s, he talked about getting back on the horse and running for office. And he said, you know, it's simple. You pick a couple of issues and you just hammer them. You just hammer them. Well, climate change is one of his key issues. But he has two bills that he is asking the legislature to pass. One extends the cap and trade program. On the face of it, that's good enough. I don't think cap and trade is very effective, but it's the only mechanism that the pro-market people will accept. So he has this plan to extend it, but it includes preemption of local and regional air quality control efforts. So for example, we're just a few miles across the bay from the Chevron refinery. The Bay Area Air Quality District was just about to impose new rules on Chevron to reduce the pollution and the carbon coming out of the Richmond refinery. Well, the governor really was negotiating mostly with oil industry figures and not so much with environmentalists as he put this package together. So it allows Chevron to buy carbon credits to essentially escape the control of the regional authority, and it can actually increase its output from the Chevron refinery, as I understand the bill today. Now there's a second bill with it that threatens greater enforcement, and it remains to be seen if that can plug the gaps here. But Richmond is, a minority city that is, captive to the refinery. There's a group of progressives there who took on Chevron, and Chevron, using the expanded, the expanded allowance for corporations to get involved in political campaigns because of Citizens United, they spent $3 million running their own candidates, people who were loyal to Chevron, and the voters saw through it. And they elected a slate of progressives. And so I find that to be very interesting, that here we have the governor who is, a very strong proponent of reining in carbon emissions. He cuts a deal with big oil that nominally advances his cause, but, at considerable cost from my point of view. The people who will see the impact the most live in Richmond, and they are using their people power, their political power, to take on a giant company that Jerry Brown's cutting deals with in Sacramento. I find it fascinating.
Okay, and you're critical. You're critical
I
of
have
Jerry Brown's
I have
approach.
opinions. I have opinions.
But isn't it a critical one? If you say he's making a deal with a big oil company, and you don't like it, and you implying it has a lot of negativeness and some positive. So you are critical of Jerry then on this issue.
I would say so, sure.
Okay, I want to say I agree with you. Cap and trade in California and the other states that are part of it, I don't think it's that effective, but I don't hold myself up as an economist. I have not studied it deeply, but it is one tool. But I don't think of that as his most important tool for reducing greenhouse gases in this state. I think he's been extremely aggressive in implementing AB 32, motivating and forcing every community in this state to develop plans. First of all, determining how much emissions they are issuing and getting them to all work together to reduce those emissions, land management, transportation, etc. I mean, that's big time, getting hundreds and hundreds of communities. And then the other thing is working like mad for energy efficiency in the transportation sector, which is one of the biggest areas of issuing them. But I find it interesting that you pick a topic of what Jerry is trying to do, and you move more to the negative than to the positive. Is that a fair observation?
Well, I consider it to be critical thinking. I don't offer a broad swipe that Jerry Brown is evil, because the political process requires compromise, and I understand that. And I accept your points and agree with you that Brown has shown leadership. At the same time, he has refused to rein in fracking in California. And my friend Tom Hayden died last year, and he believes that the reason he died was he went to visit a wastewater pit at a fracking site outside of Bakersfield, and he had a stroke as a result.
Okay.
Now, also, Governor Brown did not lift a finger for over 3 or 4 months, and it could have been longer, when the Porter Ranch natural gas site in Southern California was leaking massive amounts of methane, more methane than was reduced by all the Priuses on the road in California today.
I want to agree with you. Something should have done with the emissions down in Southern California. I don't know why the state couldn't have done something, but I just want to go something in fracking. Laws were passed within the last few years that regulated the fracking process in this state, made it more severe than they have ever been. And I remember sitting down with Senator Jerry Hill, California senator, and he went over this on my TV show. We now require that we know what chemicals, what geological impacts, what emission impacts are going to have on the fracking process. And this state does need oil. It does need gas. Okay?
But I don't, first of all, before hydraulic fracturing was introduced into California, over 40% of the gasoline that we consume came from domestic oil supplies, in-state supplies. So that number has increased slightly with fracking. But I don't think that we need to frack in California. And Brown really dragged his feet, and he watered down the legislation that was put forward.
Okay.
And so, what I'm pointing out are things that I consider to be anomalies and contradictions in our governor. And let me take a quick other example. I've been very active at San Quentin Prison for over 30 years. And I have a pretty good understanding of the Department of Corrections. And Governor Brown, he set up this program called realignment that shipped prisoners from the state prisons back to county jails. He housed prisoners outside of the state. And he did all this when there's a group of prisoners called lifers who pose very little threat of reoffending if released. And he was very slow to allow them to be released under the parole system. Now, to his credit, he is much better than his predecessors in allowing the parole process to take place. But I found it contradictory that he was under a federal court order to reduce the prison population, and he resisted and used fairly devious methods to do that.
I guess we could go on, and let's stay on the environment for a minute. I listened to one of your podcasts the other day and trying to do as you suggest, be prepared, because it's one of the qualities of your shows. And you did talk about Jerry Brown making the announcement just before the G20 that California was going to put on this big energy climate change summit in September of next year. And then you wrote about or spoke about that he took 25 or so business people and other people with him to Europe, to China.
Mm-hmm.
And you identified two of them. Do you remember who they were or what they were?
They were oil executives. Mm-hmm.
And they each one, if I remember correctly, had 3 letters for the name. And I thought I remember you said these two organizations built refineries, something of that sort. And then you raised the question, why did Jerry Brown bring these 2 specific companies to China with him? To help them, of course, get business. And I got the feeling you were saying these are companies that could help build oil plants in China, fossil fuel plants. My question of you is, of the 25 organizations that went with him, you seem to have picked 2 that could not maybe have anything to do with helping the environment. Why those 2? You could have picked the Energy Foundation, which is funded by the Knight Foundation, the Packard Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, and some of the other great foundations that are committed to saving this planet. But you
Michael, first of all, in what I do, I don't provide comprehensive coverage. I provide news and commentary on a daily basis. I didn't have time to list all 25 of those groups, the other groups are not necessarily newsworthy. Okay, what is news, what is different, what is worth commenting on is that these people who are involved in carbon extraction and burning or use were members of this delegation. I think that's noteworthy. I didn't demonize them or him. I simply pointed it out to people so that they can come to their own evaluation.
Yeah, but I could pick the other 23. Every one of them has a newsworthy aspect to them. Every one of them, because they exist. They're doing something. But you picked 2 of the negative ones. I'd like to also point out that you wrote me a memo, and you said I should consider, or you have issues about the Russian-Trump scenarios that's going on right now. And I listened to another podcast that you had where you said you doubt that the Russians hacked Hillary, right?
Well, I want to be very clear, because Hillary is a person. Hillary's State Department emails were released under Freedom of Information Act requests that were driven by a colleague of mine, Jason Leopold. What I am referring to specifically is that I doubt that the DNC was hacked by Russia, and the corollary that was alleged, that Russia then fed that information to WikiLeaks. And as recently as yesterday, Michael, I've been talking again with a key source who I rely upon
Who's that?
for this. His name is Bill Binney.
Bill Binney.
Bill Binney was the technical director at the NSA, the National Security Agency, and he devised many of the systems that the NSA uses to monitor networks. And there's a new report that came out this week, a forensic analysis of the metadata of the information that was released under the name Guccifer 2.0. That metadata indicates that the transfer of the data from the DNC server to a flash drive or another computer took place on the DNC network because the speed of transfer was so high that it could not have been achieved through a remote hacking event. And Binney has maintained this position since I first talked to him about it last summer. And he says that at any point, if there truly was a hack of the DNC, that the NSA could establish that. I know Bill Binney, and I've been talking to him for many years. He was part of a group of whistleblowers at the NSA who tried to challenge the shift to domestic collection in violation of the Fourth Amendment. And in retaliation, he and 4 others were treated like Ed Snowden. They never revealed classified information to anyone. They never collaborated with anyone outside of the US government. They were stripped of their security clearances so that they could no longer work as contractors after they left the NSA. And I'm sorry, Michael, to claim that because there was a piece on Sputnik that cited Bill Binney, Bill Binney's also been on Sean Hannity's show. I don't support Sean Hannity, but he's an American who is allowed to express himself.
Okay, so this all goes back to the claim that the Russians did not have the DMC, okay? And then it winds up with this young man who was shot and killed.
What I'm saying is we don't know, okay? There were 2 public statements, one in October, one in January, from the Director of National Intelligence and the head of the CIA. I've read those reports very carefully, and they are not to be relied upon. There is no public evidence available to support the allegations that they make, and they create a storyline, a narrative that's been embraced by the Democratic Party leadership and by MSNBC. And they have gone to the races with that. And the first bit of actual evidence that surfaced was when Donald Trump Jr. tweeted out the email exchange with Rob Goldstone. Everything else is based on anonymous sources, on leaks to the media that we have no way of verifying. And let me remind you, and this is based on a recent interview I did with Mel Goodman. Mel worked at the CIA for 18 years. He was a Russia expert. And he wrote a book recently about his own whistleblower experience when he testified against the confirmation of Bob Gates as head of the CIA in 1992. And in that book, he listed all the ways that the CIA has misled the American people about Russia in particular. Okay. And it is a sordid history. And I refuse to simply trust anonymous sources and official leaks from the intelligence community. If they can prove it, I'll accept it. In the meantime, I am happy to be a skeptic.
But what I find with your work, just a week ago, you wrote me raising the question if the Trump and Russian scenario was really credible, or if it was just fake news. Fake
I
news.
didn't use the term fake news.
I
don't
use the
use
fake
that.
news, but I get the feeling listening to your podcast that you were defending basically the Russian position, the Trump position, in this interview already.
Well, Senator McCarthy, have you no shame?
And you, and also you quoted Sean Hennessy as an expert, I thought, and he's
No, I did
he's
not.
so far
I
to the
said
right.
I said Bill Binney has appeared on Sean Hannity's program.
That's
which is not-
something to be admired?
I didn't say that.
but-
I was countering your point that because somebody at Sputnik quoted Bill Binney in a favorable way, that makes him some sort of a Russian agent.
Okay. I would never quote Bill Binney, though. I would be, I'd be a little bit more careful, especially somebody who is being promoted by the Russians.
Look, Bill Binney is one of the most credible people in talking about the NSA, its surveillance overreach, the violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. And if you don't want to accept that, you're free to do so.
All right, so I would like your help on something. I really don't know the right radio talk show hosts. I know Rush Limbaugh, Michael Savage, is that one? Are there others that are way on the right, talk show hosts, radio?
Well, Michael, I worked in the radio business for a long time. I started when Watergate was a scandal in the 1970s in Chicago. And talk radio in the United States today is all conservative. There are a handful of local hosts who are moderate, and they're just, you can count on one hand the number of out liberals who are permitted on commercial talk radio in this country today. So by definition, talk radio is conservative. It's just a range of how far right they are.
So you're not on radio, but if you're on podcast, where would you put yourself in the continuum? Conservative, left wing. Where would you put yourself?
I'm left of center.
You're left of center, but
when I was on KSFO, they had a billboard campaign, and they put my picture up, and then they pushed it over to the left margin of the billboard so that only half of my face was left, and it said, "He's a little to the left."
A little to the left.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I've been a little rough on you.
I can take it.
Yeah, but really, looking at your work, I always see compliments, but then there always seems to be raising a negative issue. But it seems to be, like with Brown, it seems to me you're a little more to the left, the right, than
I call them as I see them, Michael.
That's good.
I follow the facts. I base it on my own experience. I've been watching politics as a paid observer for over 40 years.
Yeah. Yes.
And I was a subject of J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO program in the 1970s. That's one of the reasons. And I'll acknowledge my bias, okay? Yeah. I am biased against trusting the government, the FBI, the CIA, the intelligence community, because I think that they have shown that they operate above the law, they have contempt for the Constitution in far too many cases, and that we don't rein them in. Just this week, the Senate held a confirmation hearing for the new Trump-appointed FBI director. Yeah. They didn't ask him anything about the wayward programs at the agency that he's about
Sure.
to take the helm of.
Sure. All right. I have to say this. Peter B. Collins, you have been a wonderful guest, and I have enjoyed getting to know you better,
Thank you, Michael.
and I have a lot of respect for your research
Thank you.
and your voice. Okay. I'm Michael Killen. I'm a guest host at CMCM in Marin County. I normally work in Palo Alto and some other places. Thank you very much. All right, again, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Me too.